HOA called the cops over a $675 fine. Then the sheriff shocked everyone. Can you imagine? A simple piece of paper, a $675 fine, turned into flashing police lights outside my home. My wife refused to pay, the HOA wouldn't back down. And when the sheriff showed up, what he said left the entire neighborhood frozen. You won't believe how it all unfolded. Welcome back to HOA Max Stories, where real battles with homeowners associations come alive. My name is David Miller. I've lived in small-town Texas all my life, worked most of my years in construction, and I've seen more HOA drama than you can imagine. That's why I share these stories with you. Now, before we dive deeper, I'd love for you to join our little community here. If you're over 50 like me, hit that subscribe button the way you'd wave at a friendly neighbor across the street. Simple, easy, and it means a lot. And tell me in the comments, from where are you watching today? I'd love to know. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where you wake up, sip your coffee, and expect nothing more than the sound of birds and the slow hum of life in a quiet neighborhood. But that morning, something different waited for me in the mailbox. I pulled out a white envelope stamped with bold red letters, "Notice of Violation." My first thought was, here we go again. The HOA. Always something. Always a letter. I opened it right there at the curb, the sun barely peeking through the clouds. The paper inside was sharp, official, and in big print at the top it read, HOA fine, $675. My heart sank, not because of the money, but because of the reason. They claimed we had broken a rule about how my wife decorated the front porch. A couple of flower pots, a hanging plant, and a small wooden chair, nothing outrageous. But to the HOA, it was a crime worth $675. I walked inside, letter in hand, and handed it straight to my wife. She read it once, and then again. Her face turned red, but not from shame. From anger. "This is nonsense," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "I'm not paying this." I knew better than to argue. She had that tone. That strength. And she wasn't wrong. Why should anyone pay $675 for a porch decoration? We thought maybe it would end there. That maybe the HOA was bluffing. But I should have known better. 3 days later, the HOA president herself showed up at our front door. A tall woman, stiff as a board, clipboard in hand, eyes cold like she'd been practicing this speech all night. "You've been fined $675, she said, without even a hello. "We expect payment within 7 days, or further action will be taken." My wife stepped forward, her arms crossed. "Further action? Over a couple of flower pots? We are not paying this." The president didn't like that. She adjusted her glasses, scribbled something on her clipboard, and walked away without another word. But I saw it in her eyes, this wasn't over. That night, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table, the letter lying between us like a loaded gun. What if they really push this? I asked. "Let them," she replied. "I'd rather stand up for what's right than give in to their bullying." I wanted to believe it would blow over, but something inside me knew this was only the beginning. The following week, we noticed HOA members driving slowly past our house, phones out, snapping pictures. Neighbors whispered when they walked by. It felt like we were being watched, judged, cornered. And then, it escalated. One Friday afternoon, just as the sun was going down, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. I looked out the window, and my stomach dropped. 2 police cars pulled up in front of our house, lights flashing. I could hear the neighbors' doors opening, people stepping outside, watching. It felt like the whole neighborhood froze in place. My wife looked at me, her eyes wide. "They didn't," she whispered. But they did. The HOA had called the cops. I opened the door, and there he was, the sheriff himself. A tall man, broad shoulders, wearing that calm expression that told me he had seen it all before. Behind him stood 2 HOA members, their faces tight with self-importance. And right there, in the middle of it all, was my wife, standing on the front porch, clutching that $675 fine in her hand like a flag. The sheriff spoke slowly. Ma'am, I understand you've refused to pay a fine issued by your HOA? My wife lifted the paper, her voice firm. Yes. I refused. Because this fine is wrong. The HOA president cut in, her voice sharp as a knife. Sheriff, she's refusing to follow the rules. We demand you take action. Neighbors leaned in closer. Phones were recording. Every eye was on us. The sheriff glanced at the paper, then back at my wife. His eyes softened, but his jaw tightened. He looked from my wife to the HOA, and the silence felt like it lasted forever. And then, he asked a question that made my heart stop. Do you understand, this isn't a criminal matter? Do you understand? I don't take orders from an HOA? The crowd gasped. My wife stood taller, her shoulders back, as if the weight had lifted off her chest. The HOA president's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked humiliated, cornered, powerless. But the sheriff wasn't finished. He stepped forward, his voice firmer now. Calling the police for something like this is a misuse of law enforcement. You wasted our time. And it ends right here. The HOA members looked at each other, stunned. The neighbors whispered, some even smiling. For once, it felt like we weren't alone. I'll never forget the look on my wife's face at that moment. Proud. Defiant. Vindicated. But I wonder now, if you had been standing there in my shoes, watching it all unfold, what would you have done? Would you have paid the $675 just to avoid the fight, or would you have stood your ground like my wife did? Tell me in the comments, because I really want to know how you would have handled it. The sheriff's words were like thunder rolling through the quiet evening. The neighbors stood frozen, some with mouths wide open, others whispering to each other as if they had just witnessed history. My wife didn't say a word, she didn't have to. Her eyes said it all. But the HOA president wasn't done. Her face turned red, her hands shook with frustration, and she stepped forward as if she could somehow take control of the moment. Sheriff, you don't understand, she snapped. This homeowner has refused to comply with the association's rules. If people start ignoring fines, the entire neighborhood will fall apart. We demand you make her pay. The sheriff didn't even flinch. He turned his head slowly, giving her a look that could cut glass. You don't demand anything from me, he said in a voice that carried across every porch, every lawn, every corner of the block. I enforce the law. Not HOA rules. And this? This is not a matter for the police. It was the first time I had ever seen the HOA president look small. She glanced around, noticing the neighbors staring, recording, some even smirking. You could see it in her eyes, this wasn't going her way. My wife finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. You can't bully us into paying. This is our home. We follow the real law, not your made-up ones. The president's lips trembled. For a moment, I thought she might explode. Instead, she turned on her heel and muttered something under her breath. The other HOA member trailed behind her, but not before glaring at me like I had just committed the ultimate betrayal. The sheriff adjusted his hat, gave us a nod, and said, "Don't let them scare you. Stand your ground. They'll push, but as long as you know your rights, they can't touch you." And just like that, the flashing lights faded, the cars rolled away, and the crowd slowly dissolved into the night. But the tension hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Inside the house, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table again. That same table where we had first opened the letter. But this time, the paper didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a badge of defiance. She held it up, almost proudly. You see? Even the sheriff knows they're wrong. I wanted to believe it was over. I wanted to think that the HOA had finally been put in their place. But deep down, I knew people like that don't back down. They regroup. They scheme. They wait for the next opening. And sure enough, it came. The very next morning, we woke to find another letter taped to our door. Only this time, it wasn't about a fine. It was a notice of a mandatory HOA board hearing. The words hit me like a hammer. They weren't just trying to collect money anymore, they wanted to make an example of us. At breakfast, my wife read the letter out loud. You are hereby ordered to appear before the board. Failure to attend will result in additional penalties, potential lien on property. She set the letter down and looked at me. They're not going to stop. They'll try to ruin us. And I believed her. That whole day, I couldn't think straight. Everywhere I looked, I saw eyes peering out from behind curtains. Neighbors who once waved now avoided contact. Some gave quick nods of support, others looked away like we were troublemakers. By evening, the fear had turned into anger. I remember pacing the living room, my fists clenched. This is harassment. They called the cops, humiliated themselves, and now they want to drag us into a hearing like criminals. My wife sat quietly for a moment, then said the words that would change everything. Maybe it's time we fight back. Her eyes were steady. Determined. I froze. Fight back how? By exposing them, she said. By telling the whole neighborhood what they're doing. People need to know the truth. They can't keep abusing their power in the dark. It sounded bold. Dangerous. But right. So that night, she sat at her computer, typing out every detail of our story. The fine. The confrontation. The sheriff's words. Every letter, every threat. She printed copies and slipped them into envelopes. By morning, she was walking down the street, sliding one into every mailbox. The neighborhood was buzzing within hours. Phones rang, doors knocked, whispers spread like wildfire. Some neighbors came to our porch, quietly thanking us for speaking up. Others warned us to be careful. But the loudest reaction came from the HOA itself. That evening, another knock at our door. It wasn't the sheriff this time. It was two board members, standing stiff, holding fresh papers in their hands. Their voices shook with fury as they handed them over. You've crossed a line, one of them said. You'll regret this. I could feel my chest tighten. The air felt heavy. My wife didn't flinch. She stood in the doorway, looking them dead in the eyes. We don't scare easy, she said. Not anymore. They left without another word. But as I watched them walk away, I knew the storm was just getting started. That night, as we sat in the dim light of the living room, I couldn't help but wonder, had we done the right thing? Yes, we stood our ground. Yes, the sheriff had backed us up. But now the HOA was cornered. And cornered people are dangerous. I thought about the upcoming hearing, about what they might try to do, about the threats they could carry out. And for the first time, I asked myself, were we ready for a battle that could cost us more than just money? And if you were in my shoes, would you have stayed silent and kept the peace, or would you have dared to challenge the HOA head-on like we did? The morning of the hearing came faster than I expected. I woke up before sunrise, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen, and feeling that heavy knot in my chest. My wife was already awake, sitting at the dining table with a cup of coffee, the fine letter lying flat in front of her like a battle flag. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence said enough. Finally, she looked up and said, "We're going. We have to face them." I nodded, though my throat felt dry. Part of me wanted to stay home, to slam the door in their faces and pretend the whole thing didn't exist. But deep down, I knew running would only make them stronger. So we dressed carefully that morning. My wife in her neat blouse and slacks, her hair tied back sharp and confident. Me in my old button-up shirt, ironed straight, shoes polished like it was Sunday service. If they wanted to see us as careless rebels, we'd show them the opposite: calm, prepared, and unafraid. The HOA clubhouse was just a few blocks away, but walking there felt like miles. Neighbors peeked through blinds as we passed. Some waved quietly, others whispered to each other as if we were marching toward a trial. In a way, we were. The building was small, brick, with a plain wooden door. But as we stepped inside, it felt like entering another world. A long table stretched across the room, with 5 board members seated in a row like judges at a court. Their faces were stiff, unreadable, and in the middle sat the president, the same woman who had stood on our porch demanding $675. There were folding chairs lined against the wall, already half full of neighbors who had come to watch. Some held phones in their hands, ready to record. I saw familiar faces, friends, people we had shared barbecues with, now waiting to see us put on trial. The president cleared her throat. We are here to address a violation of association rules. The homeowner has refused to pay the fine of $675. This is a serious matter. Her voice was cold, formal, dripping with authority. She slid a stack of papers across the table. Evidence has been collected. Photographs of the porch, documented notices, and reports of non-compliance. My wife leaned forward, her hands folded calmly on her lap. We don't deny having flower pots on the porch, she said. What we deny is that it deserves a fine of $675. That is unreasonable. And calling the police over it? That's harassment. Whispers spread across the room. A few neighbors nodded, others raised eyebrows. One board member, a man with gray hair and glasses, spoke up. Rules are rules. If we let one violation slide, others will follow. The integrity of the community depends on strict enforcement. I couldn't hold back. Integrity? You mean control. This isn't about plants. It's about power. You want everyone to be afraid of standing up to you. The president shot me a glare sharp enough to cut steel. You will speak only when recognized. But the sheriff's words echoed in my mind, stand your ground. I leaned forward, looking her straight in the eyes. You don't get to order me around. The room went silent. For a moment, you could hear the faint buzzing of the ceiling fan, the shifting of chairs, the breath of anticipation. My wife pulled out the letter and held it high. This fine is not just unfair. It's an abuse. And every neighbor sitting here should ask themselves, if it's us today, who will it be tomorrow? The neighbors stirred. A woman in the back nodded. A man whispered something to his wife. The board shifted uncomfortably. The president slammed her gavel down on the table. Enough. The board will deliberate and decide. They whispered among themselves, their voices low but urgent. I could see their faces tightening, eyes darting toward the crowd. They weren't just deciding about us. They were deciding how much control they still had over everyone else. Finally, the president spoke. We have reached a decision. Failure to pay this fine will result in a lien placed on your property. If necessary, further legal action will be pursued. Gasps filled the room. A lien. The word hit me like a punch to the chest. They weren't just threatening anymore. They were ready to take our home. My wife stood slowly, her voice steady as stone. You do that, and we'll take this beyond your little boardroom. We'll take it to court. And we'll show the judge every letter, every threat, every stunt you pulled, including wasting police time. The board members shifted again, unease flickering in their eyes. They hadn't expected pushback that strong. The president tried to maintain control. You've been warned. This hearing is adjourned. But as she banged the gavel, the neighbors in the back began to whisper louder. Some even clapped quietly. The tide was turning. We walked out, heads high, the cool evening air rushing into our lungs like freedom. But inside, my stomach was churning. Aline, the word echoed again and again. They weren't bluffing. At home, we sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down. My wife broke it first. We can't back down now. If we let them scare us, they'll keep doing it to others. Maybe this fight is bigger than just us. She was right. It was bigger now. This wasn't just about a fine or a porch. It was about a neighborhood's freedom or its fear. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again, wondering how far they'd go. Would they really try to take our home? Could they? Or was it all another scare tactic? And I have to ask you, if your home, the place you built your life, raised your family, lived your memories, was threatened by an HOA lien, would you stand tall and fight, or would you give in just to keep the peace? The night after the hearing felt heavy. I could hear the wind brushing through the trees outside, the quiet creak of the house as it settled, and still my mind wouldn't rest. A lien, it wasn't just words on paper. It was a threat against everything we had worked for. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my wife beside me, her breathing steady but not peaceful. I knew she was awake too. Finally, she whispered into the darkness. "They think they can scare us into silence." Her words hung in the air. I turned to her, seeing her eyes faintly glow in the moonlight through the blinds. "And what if they can?" I asked. "What if they really take this all the way?" She shook her head, firm as stone. "Then we fight harder." Morning came with a restless energy. The neighborhood felt different. When I stepped outside to grab the paper, I noticed people stopping mid-walk, their eyes on me. Some offered a small nod, others looked away quickly. The story of the hearing had already spread. One neighbor, an older man with a cane, shuffled up to me. His voice was low, almost like a secret. "What you two did in there, it gave us hope. They've been running this place for too long." He leaned closer. "But be careful. They won't forgive you for embarrassing them." His words sent a chill through me. We weren't just fighting for ourselves anymore. People were watching. Depending on us. That evening, we sat at the table again, the fine still pinned to the fridge as a reminder of what started all this. My wife tapped her finger against it and said, "If they're willing to threaten us with a lien, then we need to show everyone just how far they're going. It's time the neighborhood saw the truth." So we started gathering everything. Every notice, every letter, every photo. We stacked them neatly, page after page, until it looked less like a few complaints and more like a pattern of harassment. And then we did something bold, we called a meeting of our own. I handwrote invitations on slips of paper and slid them into neighbors' mailboxes. Community gathering at our house, Saturday at 5 p.m. Come hear the truth about the HOA. By the time Saturday rolled around, I didn't know if anyone would show. My heart pounded as I set up chairs in the backyard, the smell of fresh-cut grass in the air, the sun dipping low on the horizon. Then the gate creaked open, and people started arriving. First 3, then 5, then 10. By the time we began, nearly 30 neighbors filled our yard, some standing, some sitting, all waiting quietly. My wife stood in front, holding the stack of papers. She didn't shout, she didn't rant. She spoke with a calm, steady voice that carried weight. They fined us $675 for flower pots. They called the police when we refused to pay. And now they threaten us with a lien on our home. This isn't just about us. This is about every one of you. Because if they can do it to us today, they can do it to you tomorrow. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded. Someone muttered, "Enough is enough." We passed around the letters, the photos, the documents. People held them up, shaking their heads, their whispers growing louder. The tension in the air shifted, from fear to anger. Then one woman, a mother of 2, stood up. Her voice shook but was brave. "They fined us once for letting our kids' bikes sit on the driveway. I paid it because I didn't want trouble. But now I see, this isn't about rules. It's about control." Another man raised his hand. "They tried to tell me the color of my shutters wasn't approved. Charged me $400. I thought I was alone. But I see now. I wasn't." The crowd buzzed with stories. One by one, people spoke of unfair fines, threats, intimidation. It was like a dam breaking, years of frustration pouring out into the open. That's when I realized, this wasn't just our fight anymore. This was the neighborhood's fight. But of course, word travels fast. And it wasn't long before the HOA caught wind of our gathering. The very next day, another letter appeared on our door. This one thicker, heavier, written in language sharp as a blade. Unauthorized assembly. Distribution of misleading materials. Further violations will result in maximum penalties under association bylaws. I read it out loud, my voice trembling with anger. My wife snatched it from my hands and laughed bitterly. They're scared. That's why they're lashing out. But I wasn't laughing. I was worried. If they called the cops once, what would they do now? Would they drag us into court? Drain us with legal fees? Could they really strip us of our home? The weight of it pressed on me like a stone. But when I looked at my wife, I saw none of that fear. Her eyes burned with something else, defiance. They think they can bully us, she said. But we've lit a fire now. And it's not going out. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Some offered to help pay for a lawyer. Others wanted to sign a petition. One even suggested starting a vote to remove the board entirely. It was a movement now. Something bigger than fines, bigger than us. But with every message of support came the whisper in my head, how far would the HOA go to crush this rebellion? How much power did they really have? I stared at the fine on the fridge, the word $675 bold and black against the white paper. A small number, but it had set fire to an entire community. And as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but wonder, if your entire neighborhood stood up against an HOA that had ruled with fear for years, would you lead the charge at the risk of everything, or would you step back and hope someone else took the fall? The morning after our neighborhood gathering, the air felt electric. People stopped by our porch to thank us, to tell their own stories, to say they finally felt less alone. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we weren't fighting in the dark anymore. But the higher the flame of hope burned, the more the HOA seemed determined to stamp it out. That afternoon, as I drove back from the hardware store, I noticed something odd. A man I didn't recognize was parked across the street from our house, camera in hand, snapping pictures of our yard, our porch, even our car. I pulled into the driveway, glaring at him. "Can I help you?" I shouted. He didn't answer. He just lowered the camera, slid back into his car, and drove off without a word. When I told my wife, her jaw tightened. "They're building a case," she said. "They want to catch us in anything they can twist into a violation." And she was right. The very next day, another letter arrived. This time it listed 3 new violations: improper lawn maintenance, unapproved outdoor furniture, and unauthorized signage. The so-called signage? The small welcome mat on our porch. It was laughable and terrifying. My wife read it aloud, her voice rising with each line. "This is madness. They're inventing rules just to bury us in fines." I felt the heat rise in my chest. They're not just after money. They're trying to break us. That night, we gathered with a small group of neighbors in our living room. The blinds were closed, the lights dimmed low. We spread the letters across the coffee table like evidence in a trial. "They won't stop until we stop them," one neighbor said, his voice shaking with anger. "They fined me for leaving my trash bin out for 2 hours. 2 hours." Another woman leaned forward, whispering like someone might be listening outside. "They told me my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Do you know how insane that sounds?" The room buzzed with frustration, fear, and determination. Then my wife spoke. Calm, steady, like a leader. "If we want change, we can't just complain. We need action. We need signatures. If we can get enough neighbors on our side, we can call for a vote to remove the board." A hush fell over the room. The idea was bold. Dangerous. But possible. So the next few days, we walked door to door with a petition. Some people signed eagerly, their pens scratching across the paper like they had been waiting for this moment for years. Others hesitated, fear in their eyes. "What if they come after us next?" one woman whispered. My wife put a hand on her shoulder. "They already are. You just don't see it yet." By the end of the week, we had dozens of signatures. Enough to make the board nervous. And nervous they became. One evening, just as the sun was setting, we heard a loud knock at the door. 3 HOA board members stood outside, their faces dark, their arms crossed. "We know what you're doing," the president said coldly. "This petition is nothing more than slander. If you continue, you'll regret it." I stepped onto the porch, standing tall. "You've threatened us with fines, with liens, even with police. And still, we're here. Do you really think threats will work now?" Her eyes narrowed. "You're turning this community against itself. We built this neighborhood. We set the standards. Without us, this place falls apart." My wife appeared beside me, holding the petition high. "Without you, this place will finally be free." The president's face twisted with rage. For a moment, I thought she might scream. Instead, she hissed, "You've made enemies in powerful places." Then they turned and walked away, their footsteps heavy on the pavement. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words rattled in my head. Powerful places. What did she mean? Were they connected to lawyers, to officials, to people who could actually hurt us beyond our neighborhood? I lay awake, staring into the dark, listening to every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind, wondering if the fight had gone too far. But when morning came, and I saw the petition on the table, the signatures of our neighbors, the hope in their names, I knew we couldn't back down. Later that day, a group of neighbors gathered again, this time in broad daylight. No secrecy, no fear. We stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac, papers in hand, voices loud enough for the whole street to hear. "This is our neighborhood," my wife said. "And we will not live in fear anymore." Cheers broke out. People clapped, shouted, raised their hands. Cars slowed down, windows rolled down. The message was spreading. But in the back of my mind, I felt the tension tightening like a rope. The HOA wasn't going to take this lying down. They had already shown how far they would go. And if they felt their power slipping, what would they do next? That night, as I sat by the window watching the streetlights glow, I asked myself the question that still haunts me. When those in power are cornered and desperate, will they crumble, or will they strike harder than ever before? The night after our voices echoed through the cul-de-sac, I felt both proud and uneasy. Proud because we finally stood together, uneasy because I knew the HOA wasn't finished. The first sign came at dawn. I walked outside to grab the newspaper, only to find bright orange stickers slapped across our mailbox and front gate. Notice of non-compliance in bold letters, plastered like a badge of shame for the whole neighborhood to see. My chest burned. I ripped them off, but the glue clung stubbornly. Neighbors driving by slowed down, some honking in support, others shaking their heads nervously. The HOA wanted to humiliate us, to paint us as troublemakers. My wife stepped outside, saw the scraps of paper in my hands, and shook her head. "They're scared. That's why they're trying to smear us." But the smear campaign didn't stop there. That afternoon, a neighbor came to our door holding a flyer. "You need to see this," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. The flyer accused us of spreading lies, damaging property values, and endangering the safety of the community. At the bottom was the HOA's seal, stamped official. They had delivered copies to every house on the block. I felt my stomach twist. They weren't just targeting us anymore. They were trying to turn the whole neighborhood against us. But something unexpected happened. Instead of siding with them, people began showing up at our door with the flyers in their hands, shaking their heads, their voices hushed but angry. "They think we're stupid enough to believe this," one man said. "This is desperation," another neighbor muttered. The tide was shifting. And the HOA could feel it slipping. That evening, as the sun bled red across the rooftops, I saw the president herself walking toward our house, flanked by 2 board members. Her steps were quick, sharp, as if she were marching to battle. She stopped at the end of our driveway, her voice rising so the whole street could hear. "You are destroying this community with your lies and your rebellion." Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, some stepping onto their porches, phones in hand. My wife walked forward slowly, calm as ever, and stood tall at the end of the driveway. "We're not destroying anything. We're saving this neighborhood from your abuse." The president's face twisted. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. We can and will ruin you." The words cut through the air like a knife. For a moment, even the cicadas stopped buzzing. And then my wife did something I'll never forget. She held up the petition in front of everyone watching. These signatures, these names, this is the community. Not your boardroom, not your threats. The people are the real power here. Applause broke out from a few porches. Someone shouted, "That's right." Others clapped quietly, afraid but supportive. The president's eyes darted around, realizing the crowd wasn't on her side. Her lips trembled with rage. "You'll regret this," she spat, then stormed off with her board members trailing behind like shadows. The tension that night was thick. We sat at the kitchen table again, our hands clasped together. I could see the worry in my wife's eyes, though she tried to hide it. "What if they really go through with the lien?" I asked softly. "Then we fight it in court," she replied without hesitation. "And if they drag this out for months? Years? Then we fight longer," she said. Her resolve was iron. Mine was bending, but I clung to hers. The next morning, another blow arrived. A certified letter from a law firm representing the HOA. They were threatening legal action if we continued inciting rebellion and defaming the association. I held the letter in my hands, the black ink swimming before my eyes. "They've brought in lawyers now," I whispered. My wife's face hardened. "Good. That means they're scared enough to pay for help." But I couldn't ignore the fear creeping inside me. Court battles meant money, time, stress. Could we handle it? Later that evening, neighbors gathered in our yard again. We showed them the lawyer's letter. Some looked afraid. Others grew angrier. One man raised his fist. "If they want to fight, they've got one. We'll pool money. We'll get our own lawyer. We're not backing down." The unity gave me hope, but also dread. Because the more united we became, the more desperate the HOA grew. And desperate people don't play fair. That week, strange things began happening. Trash dumped on our lawn. Anonymous notes shoved under our door with words like "move out" scrawled in black marker. Late at night, I heard footsteps on the porch, but when I opened the door, no one was there. It was intimidation. Psychological warfare. One night, as I sat by the window keeping watch, my wife came up behind me, resting her hand on my shoulder. "They can scare us, but they can't break us," she whispered. Her words were strong, but her eyes betrayed the toll this was taking. The dark circles, the weight of sleepless nights, the exhaustion of constant battle. Still, she refused to yield. The next Saturday, we organized a rally. This time, not just in our yard, but in front of the HOA clubhouse itself. Dozens of neighbors showed up, holding signs that read "Fairness, not fear" and "Our homes, our rules." The HOA board sat inside, watching us through the windows like cornered predators. Their world of control was cracking, and they knew it. I grabbed a megaphone, my hands trembling but my voice strong. "This neighborhood belongs to the people who live here, not to bullies hiding behind bylaws and threats." Cheers erupted. Cars honked as they passed. For once, the fear wasn't on us. It was on them. That night, as the crowd dispersed and the street grew quiet, I felt a strange calm. We had pushed back harder than ever. But I also knew the fight was far from over. The HOA had lawyers, money, connections. And we only had each other. So I ask you, if your community stood with you, but the people in power threatened to destroy everything you own, would you keep fighting shoulder to shoulder, or would you walk away before the war consumed you? The night after our rally, the neighborhood felt different. The air carried a quiet electricity, as if the whole block was holding its breath. For weeks, we had been living under their shadow, but now, for the first time, it felt like the shadow was shrinking. Still, I couldn't shake the fear. Lying in bed, I replayed the day's chants in my head, the sound of neighbors cheering, the signs raised high. It felt like victory, but it also felt like the calm before a storm. And the storm came faster than I thought. Early the next morning, there was another knock on the door. This time, not just a letter or a board member. It was the sheriff again. His cruiser idled by the curb, the red and blue lights flashing faintly in the pale sunrise. My heart sank. "Not again," I muttered as I opened the door. The sheriff stood there, his hat low, his expression unreadable. He handed me a folded document. "Court summons," he said simply. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The HOA had filed a lawsuit not just for unpaid fines, but for defamation and inciting unrest in the community. Behind him, I saw neighbors gathering on porches, their faces pale. Word was spreading fast. My wife appeared beside me, reading over my shoulder. She didn't flinch. She didn't even sigh. Instead, she looked the sheriff in the eye and asked, "Do you think we did something wrong?" The sheriff paused. Then, with a faint smile, he said, "No, ma'am. I think you stood up for yourselves. Now it's the court's turn to decide." When he left, the weight of the paper in my hands felt crushing. Court. Lawyers. Judges. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This was real. That night, our living room was packed again. Neighbors filled every chair, every corner, standing shoulder to shoulder. The petition, the flyers, the threats, all of it spread out on the table like a battlefield map. One man slammed his fist down. "If they want court, then we'll bring court. We'll testify. We'll show every dirty trick they've pulled." Another neighbor nodded fiercely. "We'll chip in for your lawyer. This isn't just your fight anymore. It's ours." The unity warmed me, but fear still gnawed at my gut. What if we lost? What if they drained us with endless legal fees? What if the lien became real, and we lost our home? But my wife's voice cut through my doubt. "They think they can scare us with papers and titles. But we have something stronger. We have the truth." Her words lit a fire in me. Maybe we could win. Maybe this nightmare could finally end. Weeks later, we stood in a courtroom, the HOA board sitting stiffly on the other side, their lawyer dressed sharp and smug. Our own lawyer, a neighbor's cousin who agreed to take the case at a discount, stood tall beside us. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. My heart pounded like a drum. The HOA's lawyer spoke first, spinning tales of rebellion, disruption, and endangering harmony. He waved flyers, pointed fingers, painted us as villains. Then it was our turn. Our lawyer laid out the stack of notices, the outrageous fines, the police call, the threats, the smear campaign. Neighbors one by one took the stand, telling their own stories, their voices shaking with years of pent-up frustration. "This isn't about harmony," one said. "It's about control." "They fined me for a flower pot," another testified. "It's abuse." When my wife spoke, the room leaned in. She held up the original fine, that single sheet of paper with $675 written bold. "All of this," she said, her voice steady, "started with this. A simple fine. But it was never about money. It was about power. And today, we're saying, enough." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed to pause longer than usual. Finally, after hours of testimony and evidence, the judge leaned forward. His words were calm, measured, but they landed like a hammer. "This court finds that the HOA acted beyond reasonable authority. The fine is invalid. The threats, the harassment, the misuse of law enforcement unacceptable. Case dismissed." Gasps filled the room. The HOA members' faces drained of color. My wife squeezed my hand, her grip strong, unshakable. We had won. Walking out of that courthouse, the sunlight felt warmer, brighter. Neighbors clapped our backs, hugged us, cheered quietly. For the first time in months, the fear was gone. Back at home, we tore the $675 fine from the fridge and burned it in the fire pit, watching the smoke curl into the sky. It wasn't just paper turning to ash, it was months of fear, anger, and intimidation finally fading away. But even in victory, a thought lingered in my mind. We had stood up, yes. We had won, yes. But what about all the other neighborhoods, all the other families still living under the same kind of fear? That night, sitting on the porch with my wife as the crickets sang, I asked her, "Do you think this fight ends here?" She smiled faintly, shaking her head. No. This was just one battle. There are more out there. Families who don't know their rights. People too scared to speak up. Maybe our story gives them courage. I sat back, staring at the quiet street, the soft glow of porch lights, the place we had almost lost. And I wondered. If your HOA pushed you to the brink, threatened your home, your peace, your freedom, would you have the courage to fight back until the very end, or would you give in before the battle even began?